Welcome back to Door. As you guys know, this is ShanJor, and we're going to jump right into it. Um, Topic for the land, wealth, your identity, and the fight for you, part three. We're going to dive into reparations, and I'm going to share my thoughts about what I'm looking at, what I've been following, and just what do I think about it. So, just a quick background about myself for those who have not heard my story or are familiar with me. Um, I am of Black American and Caribbean lineage. My Black American lineage ties me back to indigenous peoples. I also would say I have found some Irish and British lines as well. Um, have not yet stumbled upon an African connection. Um, my Caribbean lineage is I definitely have a lot of Irish connections and haven't yet stumbled on the African connection, but um, it's possible that I definitely do have British and other ancestry. And I don't rule out an African connection if it's found, right? So if I find it, if I can prove it, I will say, yes, that's my story. Um, but based upon how far I've gotten in my tracing of my lineage, um, just have not found that yet. Okay. So the furthest I've gotten back in my lineage is, I think on a about four of my lines on my American side. I've definitely gotten back to about the 1600s, 1700s, definitely. A lot of my lines were either free, mostly free people, um, which is very interesting, that to learn at the time where there was supposed to be a lot of discourse going on between indigenous people and the settlers that were coming here. You know, um, as far as I can trace it, we were free. As far as what my family know, we were free. We've never really had slave stories. And if we probably did have somebody enslaved, they probably were already free by the time they probably met into my family. So, it's a very interesting thing to kind of trace your lineage back. So that's why we're going to tap into reparations and the importance of chasing your lineage for reparations, because you have to prove what you need repair for. Okay. Reparations is not just for slavery. You can get reparations for numerous of things. As I'm going to show you later in the stream, how there are other people fighting for reparations because they were forcefully sterilized by the state of California. You can get reparations because you were, let's say, falsely, let's say it's a group of people or 50 people, you can get reparations for being falsely imprisoned. In fact, they have been talking about the descendants or the people, the direct people of the race massacre of Tulsa, Oklahoma, also qualifying to have their own reparation claim just because of what happened at those events, right? So reparations can come in different ways for different things, but it is to remedy that direct group that was harmed, right? That's what it's for. Well, we're coming into a very interesting time of American history where the truth will prevail. And in that truth, a lot of people are going to find out you may or may not qualify for slavery reparations. Maybe you might qualify for discrimination reparation claim. Maybe you qualify for maybe some type of maybe banks. You can prove that the banks weren't approving loans for your people at a certain time period in a certain city in a certain area. Yeah, these things can be proven, but when we talk about reparations solely for slavery, it's going to get real muddy in the waters. You have to prove that your people were enslaved. You have to prove it. And then you have to understand the story of who they were enslaved to. So let's hop into it. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. I've been following the reparation movement since the Yvette Carnell days, the Tone Talk days, 2019, 18, 17. I was always kind of like just a fly on a wall, always wanted to understand um, really what it was all about, and what were they fighting for. And the verbiage that they were using, at the time back then, I was a little younger, so we didn't understand that verbiage was such a key thing in this. But I think that once people started realizing what was happening, especially when Obama left presidency, and you wanted to tap into why did he eliminate Negro off the history books, when a lot of our history books, our people at a certain point of history were Negro or people of color or colored people. Um, it just makes you wonder why you're now African American. You're not even Black anymore. You're African American. So your identity has changed. And all my generations, my great grandmother, she just passed a few months ago. She was born one racial classification, which is probably more likely would have been colored Negro. I was born to be Black. One bloodline, and we have different racial classifications, right? So this is not a conspiracy theory. This is not people just making stuff up. This is actual factual, that you will see that your identity in this country has changed, but there has always been one solid white identity in this country, while yours continue to change. Not only are your identities changing, but your economic wealth is also diminishing. So I remember when Danny Glover, and it was very surprising. I think that's why it really caught my eye when I saw Danny Glover was sitting here talking about reparations. Yes, I'm talking about the actor Danny Glover. And I remember I actually watched the live recording when they went down. I believe it was to Supreme Court. I believe it was. Let me make sure that's where they went. Hold on. But I remember watching it and I was very embarrassed by it because first off, I was like, I know this fool is not asleep at this reparation hearing. You know, he looked like he was asleep. I don't know now. Let me see if I can pull this up. I don't know. Do you guys remember this? I'm gonna mute it, but I'm just gonna show you Danny Glover here. Just give me a sec. Pull this up. Let's see. All right. Do y'all remember this? This hearing? Anybody remember this? This was like 3 years ago. I vividly remember this, right? And they were pushing for the reparation cause. This was when a lot of your original people, at least the ones that I were familiar with, were in the reparation fight. A lot of the people I see today, they're not really the same people that I've seen back then. So I was very confused when I met a lot of people in the clubhouse and Twitter spaces, because I'm like, oh, these are more people who may be supporting it. But I remember seeing certain faces years ago. These were not the same faces. Some people would say that the reparation movement has been co-opted. Possibly, I don't know. Excuse me, I had to take a sip of my coffee, but I don't know. I don't know. But here's Danny Glover, and I was watching it, and it was certain parts of this hearing where I could have sworn this man was asleep. I'm not going to hold you. I'm not going to hold y'all. But they were pushing for this reparations thing, right? And it has made progress with Governor Newsom taking on the reparation claim in the state of California. Okay? So I'm going to read a little bit. You know how I do. I like to pull up facts and articles and just decipher, give my own viewpoint. This is my own viewpoint. Um, I am for reparations, but I am against when people have to tell a lie to get something in life, which will ultimately destroy others in the process. And I'm going to get into what I mean by that. Okay, so it says, like I said, reparation can be for a lot of different things. And what we're looking at now is that the reparation committee is actually starting to break grounds for more of the discrimination that was happening to Black people in California and places like that. Um, I don't really see it making strides yet with the slavery story yet, because we got to remember a lot of Black people or classify or people who were self-identifying as Black at this time period. We're talking about the mid 1900s, 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. A lot of these people were migrating from the other side of the country. They were coming from the East Coast, the Southeast. They were coming from places like Texas and et cetera, and they were coming into places like, as we now know, California. So if they did have a slave narrative or a slave story, if something did happen, it would have happened into wherever state they migrated from, right? So well, let's just continue. It says right here, what are they talking about? It says the task force members acknowledging they have more questions than answers. Economists hired by the task force are seeking guidance in harms experienced by Black people, the government taking of property, devaluation of Black owned businesses, how discrimination, homelessness, and mass incarceration, and overpricing and health. Okay. Now, these are things I totally agree with. These are things that you can actually prove with living people today, how this has disproportionately affected self-identifying Black people today. We can actually prove things like this. You know what I'm saying? So it's not something that you have to trace a lineage to. No, all you have to do is just look at your economic situation, whatever housing development you were living in, and how you may have been gentrified out that area. Even when they were removing the jobs out of the communities and things like that, like you can actually prove these things, and it's very valid to prove, right? It says the California task force met in City Hall in Oakland, a city that was the birthplace of the Black Panthers, but have lost some of its African American population as rising prices, home prices force people out. Now, this is going to be your same situation dealing with New York reparations, okay? I want y'all to listen to this. There was a mass exodus of Black people leaving major cities, especially in California and places like New York, Jersey, Massachusetts. Black people are leaving because they cannot afford it. So the people that you are trying to find a solution for are not even here anymore. They left. They had to leave, right? And if these people migrated into California, that means they probably only survived 1 to 2 generations, if that, in California. So they weren't here for that long, if you think about it. So think about this. If a family migrated to California, let's say they migrated in 1960, and it's now 2023 and they're gone, yeah, that's about 1 generation, if that, that survived. That's how fast you can deplete wealth and change the reality of people. Because I think people think that a lot of times it takes thousands upon thousands of years for these things to happen, or hundreds of years for the things to happen. No, 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 no. 1 generation or even half a generation, you can completely deplete a person's wealth without them knowing it. So remember, a lot of these families coming from the South, they were leaving behind land, right? A lot of these families had land patents and they were leaving that behind. Because remember what I said the last stream, opportunities. That's the key word. That's a trick word though. Opportunity. Opportunity is just synonymous for me with comfortability. but it has nothing to do with the fact that you were already sitting on gold mines, right? Okay, so let's get back into it. It says the task force must determine when each harm began and ended and who should be eligible for monetary compensation in those areas. For example, the group could choose to limit cash compensation to people incarcerated between 1970, when more people started being imprisoned for drug related crimes, at present. What do you guys think about that? Compensation for people in jail that were wrongfully in prison. I think that's a valid thing. I think that's valid. I think it's valid that there was a push for drugs in our neighborhoods. They flooded our communities, and because of human nature. And I know people will say, well, you didn't have to do the drugs. I mean, yeah, I kind of agree with that. But at the same token, because of human nature, you become your surroundings. You become your surroundings, right? And a lot of times you didn't even know where the drugs were coming from, right? It says, or they could choose to compensate everyone who lived in over policed Black neighborhoods, even if they were not themselves arrested. Now, this right here, I don't think is going to hold. I don't think that's going to hold because, I think they can probably push back on that one. But definitely for those that have been convicted for crimes, you can prove it. Like how we see a lot of these men are coming out of prison 30, 40, sometimes 20 years after the fact, and they've been found that they were really innocent. Or a lot of these men that were in jail for like selling weed and things like that. I definitely think those type of people will probably can definitely qualify for some type of repair, right? But you have to narrow it down to those people, right? And you would have to really dig into deeply what these families are, who they are, where they are, and what's the reality today and how has it affected them. And that way you can repair those families that were wrongfully imprisoned. But I think you get real muddy when you make it a part of a broader claim, right? Because everybody's not a part of that. And I think that's why they're trying to add into the over policing part to make it a part of the broader story, right? But I definitely think that they probably can override that. Is that the task force has a July 1st deadline to complete its final report. All right. Lawmakers will need to pass legislation for payments and other policy changes to take place. It says earlier this year, the committee made a controversial decision to limit reparations to descendants of Black people in the United States as of the 19th century, either freed or enslaved. Now, let's stop right here. Matter of fact, let's highlight this whole thing. I think this is a key part. Now, 19th century, you're dealing with the 1800s, right? 1800s, free and Black people. Now, guys, I want you to understand that there has always been immigration coming into this country since the 15 to 1600s that we know of. There was so-called Black immigration in the 1800s. How do I know that? Because you can look at the story of people like, let me see, I just did an article on her, but her father was a Haitian man who migrated from the West Indies in the 1800s to work in domestic labor. One second, I'm gonna get the actual name of this lady so you guys can check her out. All right, her name is Edmonia Lewis. Edmonia Lewis. She was a sculptor and she made great waves. She was actually half American Indian and half Haitian. I'm pretty sure her Haitian roots would probably take her to some type of French connection as well. But she was in Europe and she did a lot of your Roman style sculptures in the 1800s. Her mother, the American Indian, was a Chippewa Ojibwe woman. So she was definitely heavily into her culture as an indigenous woman with with a Haitian story. And potentially could have been African because you got to understand when we're dealing with the conquistadors, you did have a North African influence that's also coming into the Americas to colonize. Let's make that clear. And then you also had some Moors that ended up on plantations to work. They had to pay off an indentured servitude debt because they were committing crime and they were encroaching on people's jurisdictions, even in the 16, 15, 1700s. Yeah. You got to pay that indentured servitude debt. You harm my nation, I harm you. You take from my nation, I have to take from you. And it doesn't have to be your life, just you have to give me your time. A lot of times, that's what a lot of these indentured servitudes contracts are about, paying off a debt to society. That's where we get the whole concept of a prison today, and you're paying off the debt of to society, right? That's why you do your time. You pay with your time because you can't get it back. So these free people coming here. Remember, we had Haitians that also were fighting with us in the American Revolutionary War. That's 1700s. And if you go further back into New England history, early 1700s, there was a Haitian influence in the New England area as well, Vermont, New Hampshire, and in fact, a lot of the black kings and governors, you guys can look this up, the black kings and governors that were in New England actually had a lot of business dealings in Haiti. So that makes you wonder what was the relationship between Toussaint and the 13 colonies. Let's talk about it. All right, so we have these free people that qualify for reparations, and from what I understand, from when I've spoken to a reparationist, they have said that the reason why these free people will qualify for reparations because they also went through discriminatory actions by the state of California. That's why. So even though they were not enslaved, right, or they were just free or freed, um, they still went on into, let's say, the 1900s, and they suffered racial discrimination in some form or another. So that's how they will also qualify for reparations, right? And some of you all might find out you have family members that were also free in the 1800s. Okay. It says Governor Gavin Newsom signed legislation in 2020 creating a task force, giving hope to reparation advocates who had despaired that anything might happen at a federal level. Since then, reparation efforts have bubbled up in cities, counties, and at colleges. Now, federal level reparations, we have already heard Biden has made it very clear because remember, when you're dealing with federal level reparations, then you're definitely going to be dealing with the president. Since we're dealing with state level, we deal with the governors. You're dealing with city level, dealing with your mayors, right? You got to understand these are levels. There's levels to everything, right? As we say in the military, chains of command, right? So federal level, the reparation conversation is not going to happen unless you include other groups of people. And that other group of people that a lot of Black people do not want to talk about are the indigenous people. Now, in my experience, like I said, dealing with reparations for the last year and a half, this was a very touchy topic. Because though it was easy to exclude Africans and Caribbeans that have just entered the nation, it's hard to exclude the indigenous people that even some of you come from, right? It's hard to do that. It says stolen land and stolen people. If there are only African American reparations, they would not be truly just. So there are people saying, the American Indians, they got their reparations. They got casinos, they got reservations, they're getting their land back. They got it. But the reparation has to be paid for why you had to give that back. Right? So that's where you're seeing a lot of people that have American Indian ancestry are starting to speak up about reparations now because you have to talk about why you had to now give us back. what was ours. Just because you give me back my land don't mean I pat you on the back, because now I have to talk about what you put me through for us to even get here in a courtroom about my identity and my land, right? So this is where you're dealing with a misclassification and a reclassification, and sometimes an extinction on paper, as we like to say, the paper genocide of a lot of indigenous people. There are thousands upon thousands of tribes in North America, South America, Central America, and the Caribbean. Some of these tribes don't even exist no more because they have actually had to amalgamate into other bigger tribes. Some tribes don't exist no more because they don't even know they are who they are. And they're just playing the game in racial classifications, right? So there's a lot at stake when it comes to indigenous people. But for the African Americans and those of African descent, because there are people who are here of African descent, but that's not all people who are dark skinned, though. Dark skin has been on every piece of this continent. And to ignore the dark skinned people of the Americas, it's like ignoring the Aborigines of Europe, when even the so called white man admits that Cheddar Man was a dark man. Okay? So don't let the white man beat you to the punch of understanding your true history as indigenous Aborigine people of the planet. Don't wait on him to tell you your story. So we have the indigenous claim, and to be honest, this will not only deal with Black indigenous people, as we say today, misclassify indigenous people to Black. You have indigenous people that are misclassified to white. It's going to be a very sticky topic because you have some people who are, like I said, they're indigenous, but they don't even know what tribe. Or, like I said, the tribe doesn't gather anymore. So they can't even find their other descendants, right? So the indigenous fight, this will be the ultimate fight, the ultimate battle of the land, of what truly happened in American history. But when we're dealing with the African American fight, this is a fight that can go either way because you had free Africans and you had enslaved Africans. But the narrative is that at some point, both free and enslaved Africans suffered a reality together. That's what the story is supposed to be. Now, there have been Black people that have been in America, Caribbean too, that have always had wealth. And they did not suffer your reality. And I know that's going to be a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow, but they didn't suffer your reality just because their skin was dark. And this is where people are going to have to start getting out of the commercialized understanding of what is so-called Black culture, because we've made Black culture some sort of experience, but everybody don't have that experience, but they're still so-called Black. Now what? How do you classify those people? I guess you'll just call them boule. Well, as I said before, a lot of you are come from the boule. You are the descendants of the original boule. You're not that far-fetched, right? So the indigenous reparations, a lot of people feel like it can overshadow for the Africans and even Caribbean slaves that came here to work, because there were Caribbean slaves. If you want to see an example of Caribbean slaves coming to America to work, you can look up the history of Shelter Island, Staten Island. Should I pull that up for y'all? Because I don't like to talk without having my resources. I want to make sure I give y'all everything you need, because I know that some people be like, no, you're trying to just insinuate And you're trying to ease the Caribbean in. You're trying to ease that in here. But no, let me pull up real quick. Sylvester Manor. Let's pull it up real quick. Sylvester Manor. Let's look up Shelter Island. I said right. Shelter Island, New York. All right. Let's check this out. Hold on one second, y'all. Let me make sure I get the right. Let me make sure I get the right source. But yeah, there were Barbadian slaves that came to work in America. And you'll see this repeatedly happening through Massachusetts, Virginia. In fact, let me also bring that up. How about Virginia? Let's bring that up because a lot of people know about that history. And like I try to explain to people, Barbados it's a part of the British colonies at some point. Um, Remember, when you're slave trading, you're going to slave trade between your jurisdictions. You're not going to do too much veering off and doing all this stuff like that. No, no, because that's actually how a lot of wars were taking place. A lot of wars were taking place because of the encroaching on the jurisdictions, like between the French and the Spaniards, et cetera, et cetera. But hold on one second, y'all. In 1661, Barbados was already 16 years. Blah, 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 blah. By the way, Williams and other historians note that enslaved Barbados included not only enslaved Africans, but also tribal enough to indigenous people from the. Okay, so let's look at this real quick. I'm going to get to another source. All right, it says right here 1661. By the way, Williams, and they're talking about Eric Williams right here. Eric Williams right here. Okay. Let's go down. Eric Williams says, by the way, Williams and other historians note that enslaved in Barbados included not only enslaved Africans, but also non-trivial numbers of indigenous people from the English colonies in New England or Virginia who have been captured by settlers there and transported down the Caribbean. All right. I am not sure if the plantocracy in Barbados considered these people also to be Negroes. It is very possible that they did. Let's talk about it. See, now this is going to be the intra-American slave trade when people were coming into Barbados as slaves. So the British, when they would capture the American Indians throughout the 13 colonies, a lot of times they would send them down to the Caribbean. They would send them to North Africa. They would send them to and I have proof of them sending them to the Iberian Peninsula, that same region. They would also send them to Europe. They would send them to even West Africa. They would send them to Central America, South America. So they would send a lot of people different places coming out of the 13 colonies. And I'll probably do another stream where I get more in depth with that. But for the sake of this stream, let's talk about the fact that more than likely, the reason why they would have considered these people Negroes because they were of a certain hue. Let's talk about it and let's be honest about it. Okay? There's no confusion when somebody looks different because when a lot of the Irish came to Barbados, or the ones that stayed in Barbados, because they also shipped a lot of Black Irish, so-called Black Irish, to Jamaica. And those Black Irish were dark and they were children a lot of times, being sent to Jamaica to work on the slave plantations in Jamaica. Irish Black children. But the Irish that a lot of times that did stay behind in Barbados as well, they were dark and they were also lighter. And they would oftentimes use the Irish as like this buffer class. But you know what they call the Irish people that were white-ish? They call them red legs. And they call them red legs because of the complexion they would turn being in the sun, working in the sun. So you knew to identify and to separate the red legs from the other dark skinned people. But when the Indians came from New England, it's possible they were still called Negro. Okay? It's very possible. And guess what? That is what happened. They got lumped into the populations there. When the Scottish indentured servant, the Irish indentured servant, you had just even some of your Brit indentured servants. Then you have your American Indian indentured servants. Then you have your African servants. All these people coming together and they're mixing. That's why you couldn't tell who was the Negro. And what exactly is a Negro, right? So, this is an example how people from Virginia and New England were ended up in the Caribbean as slaves, right? We can also look into slavery on Shelter Island, a story that is not hidden in a way, just that a lot of people just don't know about a lot of things. And to be honest, I literally just found this out too. I'm not going to sit here and act like I was just up on this my whole life. No, I literally just found out about right here. Let's read this. 1652, an Englishman named Nathaniel Sylvester sailed with his wife Giselle from his family's sugar plantation in Barbados and landed on Shelter Island. He, along with his brother and two other investors, had purchased the island from an English aristocrat and create an 8,000-acre estate servicing the sugar plantations of the West Indies. So they basically came here trying to mirror what they're already doing. That's what they happened. A lot of times they were bringing people from the Caribbean with them. Okay. They were bringing people from the Caribbean to work on these plantations. Now, it would be argued that these had to be Africans that came. But as I just showed you and as I just explained, there was a variety of people coming out of Barbados, even at this time. We're talking about let's go back. 1652, right? 1652. In this time period, you still had people being transported out of New England into or out of the eastern seaboard into the Caribbean. A lot of times they would be transported back. Huh? But I know that for story's sakes, they're going to just say African. Because that alleviates the headaches of trying to explain how people were just up and down the East Coast. You can actually go on slave voyages if you believe in slave voyages. But you can actually see because I don't really agree with the numbers that they have on there. I don't believe that they're accurate at all. But they kind of show the intra-American slave trade. So you'll see ships going from like Massachusetts down to Virginia, then from Virginia maybe going down to Louisiana. So you'll see these little travel routes that are happening back and forth up and down the East Coast with people, right? Um, it's not far fetched. They were shipping people around, sometimes bringing them up and bringing them down. Sometimes they were bringing them down to Barbados to be Barbados. Now, what does it mean to be Barbados? And I'm going to get back on track with reparations because I just want to prove to you, I just want to show people that if you do have slave lineage, if you do have a foreign slavery story, it can be found. But if you cannot find it, and you have gone as far as you can damn go. Not talking about people who hit brick walls. But if you have gone as far as you can go and you still don't see, you just might not have it. Baby, chuck it up. Okay? But to be Barbados basically means to be broken down. It needs to be you're stripped. You're stripped. Right? Let's see. Hold on. Let me bring this up. Let me bring this up. To be Barbados is no different to be a barbarian, to be barbaric, and it will send you to be Barbados. Let's check out the meaning. One second, let's see. Because this one is just bringing me, here we go. The history of Barbadosin. Ooh, let's talk about it. See, this is the history they should be teaching a lot of people. The history of Barbadosing. This ain't got nothing to do with just the island of Barbados, but a Barbados was used as one of the prime locations to Barbados people. Okay. It says literature asserts the practice of shipping white convicts to Barbados of yesteryear. The existence of white slavery and the notion that these indentured servants were subjected to conditions bad as or even worse than that of black slaves. A new term into the English language to transport to the island was to be Barbados. It said, if that is the right word, I believe that it was called Barbadosin. Vagrants and others who seemed superficial in our society and bundled them off in ships to islands where they were all intents where they were to all intents and purposes slaves. Okay. These people were probably treated worse than slaves themselves because there were a limited time. Oh. The flogging and the misery were suffered as much as those of European origin as by slaves later. Above one free mentions the term Barbadosan as is a term that is becoming less popular day by day, represents a starting point from this paper to seek to explore the practice that is prevalent in the early years of Barbados development. And that's how you get the introduction of sugar in Barbados, which produced their tobacco and cotton. So Barbadosan, it's pretty much it's a method. It wasn't just used on white servants and white indentured servants. It's a method to break people down. You put them to their lowest level, and you subjugate them into servitude. That is to be Barbados, okay? So the concept of what was happening at this time, a lot of times they'd be shipping people out of North America into the Caribbean, Barbados them, bring them back with a new identity and understanding. Okay? That's what you do. You break them down. And when they could not be broken down so much, a lot of times they would send them to places like Jamaica. And if you know the history of Jamaica, then you know that Jamaica a lot of times was treated like a prison for a lot of the indigenous and unruly people that were coming from other sides of the world into servitude or slave labor who just would not conform. A lot of times they sent them to Jamaica. And you get the history of butt breaking and a lot of the extreme measures and how they would further Barbados you down, break you down, right? But let's get back to reparations. And I just kind of wanted to touch on that so you guys can see how there is a lineage and a history of the concepts that the British use to break down their slaves, and it can be proven. You just have to find and do the work. It's not a mystery. It's not a conspiracy. It's real. These are real people, real stories in real time. All right. Rhode Island. So Rhode Island was attempting or has attempted to do reparations. $10 million of reparations. Let me tell you, this is complete crap. Most of these reparation plans are crappy. I'm going to just keep honest with you. Complete crap. I broke this down in a few of my audio spaces. We talked about this stuff. This stuff is really just it's like it's just something to say that we at least we did something. At least we gave you niggas something. Like that's how they treat these type of situations. $250,000 and federal money to launch legal defense fund for residents facing eviction. $400,000 dedicated to directly support Black and Native American residents displaced negatively impacted by urban renewal, gentrification, and $500,000 to expand the guaranteed income program for low income residents that launched last summer, among other initiatives. Crap. $400,000. Really? That's a slap in the face. It's a slap in the face. You can't even you can barely save one family with that. Seriously? $250,000. Seriously? I've seen people raise more money on GoFundMe. Seriously, y'all. Come on. Come on, y'all. Check this out. We feel like 10 million is nice, but it's definitely not enough for true reparations. We also recognize this is a city effort, and true reparations have to be on a larger scale. It has to not just be government, but also private enterprise. Huh. Let me tell you something. These people are playing games with this concept of reparations for slavery. That's what they're doing. Look at this, 10 million. They proposed it, keyword proposed. I don't mean you're going to get it. They would like to get it. I mean you're going to get it. Financial literacy, home ownership, workforce training, small business development, and other programs recently recommended by the City Reparation Commission. This is programs, y'all. This is the same shit you can get right now. Literally. This is welfare. That's what this is. This is the okey doke. This is the okey doke. But we got something even more better than that. Let's talk about California again. California reparations spark concern over white people possibly qualifying for reparations. I asked this question to a lot of the reparationists because y'all keep saying you don't want it race-based because race-based will add in the new Black immigrant, right? So you want it lineage-based. But lineage doesn't have a race. Hello? A lineage doesn't have a race. Hello? Let's talk about it. A lineage is a lineage. And there's many people that can come and be a part of this lineage because you married, you had kids, you did this, you did that, but that does not define that's not your race, baby. The state's reparations plan might potentially benefit white identifying. I want to highlight that. Because you guys think that you're born into a race. A lot of people have this idea that you're born in a race and you're going to die about your race when you don't understand that you are choosing to identify as this race. Nobody's making you identify as this. You check the box. You check that box. Hello? Let's talk about it. Self-identify. Hello? Did you forget? Did you forget? Africans self-identify. Caribbeans, what? Self-identify as Black. And then you just have American freedmen. So let me explain what this is that we're looking at. California passed this new bill that they're going to honor delineation for Black Americans in California. And this is supposed to help advance the California reparations now. That can be debated, but I'm going to show you where it's actually showing at. Just give me a second. Let me show my other screen. So check this out. California becomes the first state to break down Black employee data by lineage. Hello, my Black Brits. Hello, my Black French. Hello, my Black American Indians that self-identify as Black today, because there were British people that were of a darker hue. There were French of a darker hue. There were a lot of people of a darker hue that came to this country since the 1700s, and you identify as Black today. That's your lineage, baby. And you might even have your African story too. Your Mexican story. You might have a South American story too. But it says California is the first state to require its agency to present a separate demographic category for descendants of enslaved people when collecting state employee data. These demographic categories will include African Americans who are descendants of people who were enslaved in the United States and Black employees who are not descendants of people who were enslaved in the United States. Should I go back? Should I go back? So let's look at these classifications that they have put on the table now. You got African American, descendants of persons who were enslaved in the United States, means an individual who self-identifies as Black, African American, or a freedman, and have at least one ancestor who was enslaved in the United States. Let me tell you something. There were African Americans who were never enslaved. You just eliminated a whole group of people, potentially millions of people. Let's go down to what American freedman is. It means a persons who gained freedom from slavery in the United States or their descendants. But if you were always free, you didn't gain your freedom. You were always free. So where do you lie in this situation? Oh, you don't exist no more. You're written out of history now. You all have just eliminated a few million people in this country that identify as Black today. You eliminated them. But I know the narrative is that at some point you had to have at least one ancestor that was enslaved. So let's just say that's the case. Every Black person had to have at least one ancestor enslaved, right? Okay, let's roll with it. So then you're African American. Okay. All right. Okay. And then you're African American, right? All right. Caribbean Blacks, they self-identify. But then we got this real funny style looking section right here. We got the other Blacks. Other Blacks means individuals who self-identify as Black, who either left Africa to a country not in the Caribbean before immigrating to the United States, who are descendants of such a person. Where do you fit a South American that's Black? Like a Brazilian. Brazil is not the Caribbean. Oh, I guess you're just gonna chuck it up that they came from Africa at some point, right? Where do you fit people that are from Australia that probably have to identify as Black because they want to, because of skin complexion, and they're in the United States? Are they also they're not other Blacks from Australia? Um, What kind of verbiage is that? That left Africa. But I'm gonna tell you why Africa has to keep coming up in the conversation of Black, because Blacks are one of the racial groups of Africa. That's why. So you have to put it back to Africa at some point. Even though we can see people that are as Black that are all over the world, not from Africa, right? So then you'll say, well, just because you're dark, and this is what we've been saying, just because you're dark, don't mean you're Black. It doesn't mean you're a part of the racial groups of Africa. These categories that they created for Black is just for Africans. That's it. But if you do your genealogy and you don't find that African, baby, you don't exist anymore. You don't exist. At least not in the Black world. You have to find your indigenous roots and you have to classify as such now, right? So this is where reparations is starting to look like. Some people are finding out that they're American Indian and they got European roots. You don't fit the status quo. You better classify as indigenous. You don't qualify as being Black in America. Nor do you qualify as being Black for reparations. Because remember, it's for free and enslaved Blacks. But you Indian, and you come from Indians. And they possibly, at some point, probably made it with some Europeans. Your story is out the window now, according to them, right? So we're going to wrap this up right here. We're going to come back with part 4. Part 4, we're going to tap into who are the people that's supposed to pay reparations personally. We're not going to deal with the government anymore because we see that on a government level, it's a complete mess. A complete mess. So we're going to tap into the part of history where individual families are coming to the forefront and saying, hey, I was a part of the slave trade. And then we got also Black families that are also keeping hush hush about their slaves as well. We're going to see you next time. Thanks for coming to the Velvet Door.